Welcome to Biologica. I'm Dr. Susan, a veterinarian and a marine educator from Maine. On this show, we'll be exploring the many ways that animals and humans interact and that society and nature intersect. Please visit my Patreon or my Podbean page to support the show or to suggest future episodes. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode today. Thanks for listening.
Fishing all of the time, baby going fishing too. That's your life, your sweet wife will catch more fish than you. Many fish bites if you got good bait. Here's a little.
The episode of Biologica today is going to focus again on the special fish called the alewife, otherwise known as the river herring. We're going to be focusing on a regional project here in southern Maine, the Mill Brook project and fish ladder, where the largest run of alewives from Casco Bay, Maine, migrate upstream to Highland Lake. Highland Lake is in the town that I live in. For several years, I've been a fisheries observer, volunteering as a citizen scientist to stand near the dam and count the fish. If you are joining us on part 1, which was the Penobscot Nation perspective on alewives, you'll know that Dan McCaw recommended that we learn to keep our eyes open and really get to know our local streams and lakes and waterways. And today we're going to take a close look at one close to my heart that's in my community here. We'll talk to the biologist that manages the project, and you'll also join me while we go out to the fish ladder itself and count alewives that are coming upstream. Finally, we'll take a look at some published research about alewives and have a poem about alewives in Damascotta, Maine. I hope you enjoy the episode.
I'm a going fishing, yes, I'm going fishing, and my baby going fishing too. I went on down to my favorite fishing hole, baby grabbed me a pole and line, threw my pole on and caught a 9-pound.
To start, we'll travel together to the Mill Brook Dam, a small dam between Mill Brook and Highland Lake, where there is a fish ladder or a fishway to help the alewives swim upstream to the lake. I'm going to be there counting the number of fish that are coming through the dam, and I hope you enjoy checking this out with me. It's May 13th. I'm in the field, and it's a little windy, so you might hear that on the recording, but I'm just arriving at the Highland Lake Dam, which is where Highland Lake, it looks like it's flowing out into the start of Mill Brook in Westbrook, Maine. And I'll get some pictures of this, but let me hold the phone down and see if you can hear the rushing water. What you're hearing there is actually a fish ladder. A little bit past the dam. I'm going to step past the fish ladder grate. The dam is over here. I'll hold my phone out and hopefully not drop it. That would be not great. But here's the dam. You can hear it probably sounds different. It's more of a sheet of rushing water as this edge of the lake empties down it toward the stream. So I'll hold that out one more time. Now I'll go back to the fish ladder, which is a little separate channel from the dam, zigzags up and creates a little spot where fish that return from the ocean to the lakes for breeding can get up since they can't get up the regular dam. So I'll hold that down. It sounds a little different. They do have to swim against the current, but it's a little bit less steep, a little bit less fast and rushing. I don't think there's any way they could get up the other side of the regular dam. So what I'm going to be doing here today is a citizen science project, participating with a number of other trained volunteers, and we hang out by the fish ladder and we do some measurements like how deep is the lake and what's the weather like, and record the time, that sort of thing. And then we count every time the fish cross through the fish ladder. So I'll get set up here and then I'll maybe make a recording again and let you know if I'm seeing any fish today. All right, I have a data sheet out and a writing utensil. I'm going to lower this bright blue mercury-free thermometer down into the lake. In Maine, a lot of what in the Midwest, in Indiana and Michigan, we would call lakes, a lot of them are named ponds here, and the word lake in Maine is really reserved for the biggest of the lakes, like Moosehead Lake. Oh, there I saw my first fish. A little fish just made it across the swim ladder, and I saw it. There's a little white painted projection right at the end of the fish ladder so that it makes it easier for the surveyors to be able to see the fish. I can hear a lot of bird calls, and I don't know if you can hear them because the water is also rushing. Then I'm dangling my feet over the side, looking at where the water is rolling into the fish ladder and watching out for fish while I get the temperature of the water. Also, all the clouds of the sky are reflected in the water, and there's little ripples and little bugs flying across, so it's kind of relaxing here. Little bugs on the surface of the water. Luckily, we're before mosquito and black fly season, so no bugs are bothering me, contrary to the reputation that Maine has in the spring. So my thermometer said that it's 50 degrees Fahrenheit or just over 10 degrees Celsius. Part of what they're studying here is the cycle of when the fish come through and how many, because it's one of the sort of signs of spring. I think it's called phenology, when you study seasonality to nature. So this is interesting both for management and study of the alewives themselves, and for understanding the ways that climate change or other factors might be affecting when the alewives run. I know that the temperature in the Gulf of Maine is shifting. I wanted to add in a quick search I did on studies related to phenology and environmental changes or climate change and temperature changes. There's a couple different studies out there that are pretty interesting. I'll highlight two quickly. One is from the authors Lombardo and al. From 2019 in the Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Sciences, and it's called Evidence for Temperature-Dependent Shifts in Spawning Times of Anadromous Alewife, Alosa pseudoharingus, and blueback herring, Alosa estivalis. They looked at 4 decades of presence and absence data from fisheries surveys, and they found something pretty interesting. They found that the overall season moved earlier and also shortened, and they correlated this to temperatures. So, for example, in 2010s, the alewife arrived to a spawning habitat 16 days earlier and left 27 days or almost a month earlier, with a peak at about half a month earlier relative to the 1970s. According to the authors, the changes in incoming and outgoing timing for the alewives have shortened spawning systems by 11 days for alewives over 4 decades, and that influence of a shortened spawning season might warrant further investigation. On the other hand, an article from 2022 published by Rebecca Dalton et al. In the Marine and Coastal Fisheries Journal called Phenological Variation in Spring Migration Timing of Adult Alewife in Coastal Massachusetts. Phenological Variation in Spring Migration Timing of Alewife looked at a number of factors, including temperature, currents, and other environmental, regional, and local changes. And they looked at 12 different spawning runs in Massachusetts. The authors found that in these cases, it looked like local factors might have more importance than regional factors, but they did indicate that more study was needed. So fisheries biologists are actively looking at the phenology or the seasonal timing of the alewife runs. So fisheries biologists are in fact studying the phenology or seasonal changes with environmental changes, sea temperature changes, both locally and regionally. And they're arguing that it's important to get more data to see what's happening here. I'm going to sign off and just sit here quietly for a little minute. The wind is rippling on the surface of the water. I can hear red-winged blackbirds, which we heard about from Agnes, the young bird watcher, and I know she would appreciate them. And it's just beautiful. There's sparkles on the surface of the water. Wow, it's a lovely day. I am lucky to be out here. All right, that was predictable. I just contributed a pair of sunglasses to Mill Brook. I'm sorry about that, but I leaned over to check the water depth gauge, which is at 5. It's well over the fish ladder. They can adjust the height of the fish ladder. I leaned over and off my sunglasses went. Luckily, they were not fancy sunglasses at all. So yeah, the water level is 5 feet. The fish ladder is covered with water. My sunglasses are well on their way down the fish ladder, so apologies to any alewives that encounter my sunglasses on the way. And we're off. We're counting. Oh, we have an amazing little tool here, a clicker. I am a sucker for old school traditional scientific equipment like the clicker counters. I have one at home that actually you can sort of use all 4 fingers to do manual blood cell differential counts. It's so cool. So I'm very excited about this little clicker here. I know we could do it on our phones, but it's just so much. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to click it. A fish just went past. It's so satisfying. Hopefully we'll see some more. I have these dreams of being here when they're just going through so fast that you can hardly keep up with them. I'm sure that happens. I think we're at the front end of the Alewife run. It just started. So the fish are coming through, but I think they're going to be picking... Oh, there's another one. I think they're going to be picking up soon. You know, at the peak of the alewife season, the water is just thick with alewives. There's predators flying overhead. It's a wild alewife bonanza. It's short-lived but incredible thing to see.
I wish I was a fisherman, tumbling on the seas, far away from dry land and its bitter memories. Casting out my sweet life with abandoned love. Now ceiling bearing down on me, save the starry sky above with light in my head. You in my arms. Woo!
We'll pause on the fish ladder, but return later on in the episode to see how it's going. Next, we're going to be interviewing Toby Jacobs, the project manager at the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust. Toby is a biologist that manages the Fishway project on Mill Brook. I'm here today with Toby, who's a program manager at the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust. Did I say the land trust name correctly, Toby?
Yep, you got it.
Awesome. Toby, can you talk about how you got interested in this kind of work and what your role at the land trust involves?
Absolutely. My background is in biology. I have an undergrad degree in general bio and a master's in conservation biology. I was always interested in the natural world and studying it and working in it, and had a tropical leaning for a long time through school. I spent a fair amount of time in Central America doing volunteer work and a little bit of research work.
Neat.
And for a while I thought that's where my career would take me, but through grad school and shortly after I started putting down more roots home here in Maine. I've always lived in Maine since grade school at least. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely consider this home, and started to get more exposure to the land trust world as really the epitome of local conservation and some of the same concepts that I was interested in the tropics, where it's obviously warmer and there are lots of colorful and exciting plants and animals, but started to appreciate all the diversity and just the value of the natural world here at home as well. And got interested in land trust as a way to conserve nature and get to work in it, do the same type of work that I'd always been envisioning, but maybe more on the direct conservation side as opposed to more of an abstract research side of things. And so I did a lot of volunteering and a lot of networking for a number of years to really get a foot in the door in the land trust world, and eventually was able to work into a full-time position. I started half-time with PRLT and half-time with another land trust. And at that point, I was doing stewardship and events and a little bit of lands, which is everything to do with the acquisition of new conservation lands. But at this point, we've been able to expand our operation to specialize a little bit. So we have a separate events and outreach and education manager, and I do I've really focused more in on the trails and land conservation at this point.
Excellent. Well, I'm picturing you formerly working in the tropics, and at least being from Maine, you knew what you were in for with the last week or two of rainy weather and cold weather this spring.
Oh, yes. No stranger to rainy seasons.
Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about the Alewife and fish ladder project that you've been managing at the Land Trust?
Yeah, I believe this is our 5th year coordinating the fish count. That was formerly done by USM professors Karen Wilson and Theo Willis, along with the help of some grad students who got it up and running. And the goal is to get an accurate population count as it changes year to year of the number of alewives successfully migrating from the ocean back into their natal spawning grounds of Highland Lake. And it was originally just a USM program, supported by some other state agencies who are interested in the data. And this was all building on the removal of the Smelt Hill Dam in the mid-90s, which allowed the physical passage of fish up to the dam. And then the fishway allows them to go from the brook up into the lake, past the dam, of course. The USM started the program, and then there were a few years where we were overlapping a bit. The USM and PRLT had shared interns, and the interns were working on trail work and monitoring and land trust things for us, and primarily fish count monitoring for USM. So we were not directly involved at that point, but it was the first connection. And at a certain point, it seemed evident that we had the resources and logistical capability to take that on as well, in addition to our water quality work. And it was a little easier making that part of our professional operation as opposed to the professors essentially volunteering to do it and having to put a lot of hours into that. And so, again, that was about 5 years ago. And so we've coordinated the count since then. So we recruit volunteers, train them, and collect all the data that then gets set aside and compared to the previous years.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about the unique life cycle of the alewife? You referenced it there, and the listeners for this podcast tend to be nature lovers and animal lovers, but they may not have heard about the kind of migrations you referenced there.
Absolutely. So alewives are anadromous fish, which means they migrate from the ocean to freshwater. It can be for different species, river, actual moving water, or still water and ponds and lakes. In the case of alewives, their natal spawning grounds are still water, so lakes, usually lakes, but potentially ponds too if it's large enough. So they hatch as juveniles in freshwater. After a couple weeks to several months of growth, they'll travel back downstream to all the way to the ocean. They'll spend 3 to 4 years in the ocean as they mature. And then as they're adults, they will migrate back to whatever body of water it was that they were born in. In our case, Highland Lake, of course, is the one of most interest. And they'll spawn in that body of water. And then unlike some other species like salmon, they don't die at that point. The adults will also migrate back to the ocean, and they can do that 3 to 4 times in their life.
Wow. I did not know that. That's quite a trip.
It is indeed, and it's a longer or a shorter trip depending on the bodies of water involved. And Mill Brook and Przemska, they have about an 11-mile journey from the ocean to the lake.
Wow.
And historically, there would have been many other species joining them in Mill Brook and elsewhere. And alewives they're one of the more tolerant species of physical disturbance, and so they're one of the easier ones to restore. And the current alewife run is restored. It was stocked in Highland Lake, and so that's why they all returned to there. But it wasn't a natural population that was able to come back, unfortunately. And hopefully we'll get to the point where the other 10 plus species of fish, including salmon, will be able to return to waterways like Mill Brook.
That would be amazing. It's kind of incredible that they know where to go. I guess with the adults making the trip several times, they're actually tracking back to the same place. So kind of remembering, or is it understood how they know where to go back to their origin?
I don't believe it's 100% understood. And that's a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I think it's a bit of a mystery involving chemical signals and flow signals in some combination.
That's very cool.
In addition to just memory, as you mentioned.
So besides this being this incredible feat and a bit mysterious to hear about this migration, why should people care about the alewife? What is the importance of this fish to people and to the ecology?
Yeah, so ecologically, they're very important in one sense because of what I mentioned is they're a bit tolerant, and so they can be pioneer reintroduction species the way they have been in Mill Brook and other waterways that have reopened up after years of closure and lack of access. And so they can establish some of the ecological balance, but also just show that it can be done. And of course, salmon is a really charismatic species we always think about and hear about in Maine. And so if it can be done with alewives, then potentially reintroduction could be done with other things like salmon in the future. So they're an interesting flagship and model for things like that. In terms of their direct role, they exist in pretty large numbers. And so the alewives as a full population represent a fairly large amount of energy and nutrients. And so one of their principal roles is through the movement of their bodies, essentially moving all that nutrient and energy from ocean ecosystems where food webs are really diverse and deep, and there's just a lot of energy and nutrient material, moving all of that into the terrestrial ecosystems. As they migrate up Mill Brook or other waterways, they are preyed on by all kinds of different predators, from mammals to birds. And then once they get into the lake, it's the same sort of situation where larger fish will eat them, larger birds, mammals that can catch them on the side. And so as they and their juveniles are consumed, all those nutrients from the marine ecosystem come into the terrestrial ecosystem, where at the lower part of the food chain, nutrients might be a little harder to come by. And then the reverse works as well seasonally. And so once the season, all these nutrients are moving one direction, and then later in the season, they're all moving back the other direction. And so it's a good way to recycle things between the two systems, and it kind of creates a seasonality between all the different involved species as well. Financially, alewives have traditionally been important in Maine as lobster bait. They can be smoked and eaten, but they're not considered a delicacy, I would say. It's more of a novelty for folks to eat alewives these days. But beyond that, they're a really interesting species for people to observe, as they do most on the trails in Mill Brook, but for volunteers, they see them at the dams. Many other places, folks can see them actually migrating up the fish ladders. Damascotta Mills is a really well-known one, and that's one example of a place where there's a whole festival around alewives. So they're creating this interesting public outreach event just around the migration, and that's really grown. We've seen interest in our little run grow a lot in the past few years as well. So, it's part of the spring-summer transition around here these days.
Yeah, a definite sign of spring that people watch for. And I know about 20 years ago was the first time I saw the alewives. I was newly in Maine for grad school down at Damascotta, the Darling Marine Lab, and somebody tipped me off to go check out the Damascotta Mill alewife run, and I'm so glad they did. When I went there, I was blown away because there were ospreys and bald eagles everywhere. And so I always thought of them as important for individual predators as a food source, but I never really thought about them as sort of this conveyor belt of energy that's a living conveyor belt moving in and out from the ocean and the waterways, the inland waterways, which is really cool.
Absolutely. And again, they would have been just one of many species on that conveyor belt historically, but it's a good start.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, we've covered a couple things that I was really interested in asking you. What's the history of the fish ladders themselves? How did people think of that? I don't know if this is outside your area or if you've sort of learned about this in your work. And also, are the ladders hard to maintain? Kind of, how do they work and where did they come from?
Yeah, so to take the last part first, the ladders do require some maintenance. It's on essentially a yearly basis. The baffles, the wooden structures in the fishway are inserted and removed. And what those are for folks who haven't seen them, they're essentially a hollow rectangle made of 2x6 lumber, and they're inserted every 3 to 4 feet along the rise of the fishway. And that's meant to actually break up the flow of the water. If those weren't there, you would essentially have one long water slide, and the water will pick up speed the whole way. And the volume and speed of the water at most points of the year would be too much for the alewives to swim up. So they would essentially be covering the whole rise of the dam, all that, and all the velocity from the gravity of the water, having to contend with all of that at once. And like natural rapids, where there are rocks and ridges and varied topography, that breaks things up into separate rapids and mini pools and really just slows down the water. And that's the goal of the baffles as well. So the alewives can take these rises 6 to 12 inches at a time, as opposed to having to do the whole run at once, which is, of course, at the very end of their migration. They've already swum this 11 miles upstream. And so it'd be a little much to ask them to cover the whole dam's height all at once.
That makes so much sense.
The fishway works. Fishways in the U.S., they date back to the late 19th century with the first ones. And they've always really been of interest with dams. And dams obviously served a key purpose, especially in older times, for electricity generation, etc. But the fish were also important as a food source, and so they've often been in mind in communities where a dam existed that it would be great to have your cake and eat it too, by having the benefits of the dam, but also being able to get the fish past it.
Got it.
I think in Europe, they go back to the 1600s or so.
Wow.
And I cannot speak to what design they have, but I'm sure it was something very similar. It's not a hugely technologically sophisticated structure. And again, the idea is just to create this whole series of pools and smaller rapids that alewives are capable of tackling one by one.
That's so cool. And I love that they stretch back that far. And also, I always wondered what the wooden structures were for. And it really makes sense how you explained it. And I can kind of picture walking along the trail along the section of river with the land trust that doesn't have the dam and the ladder, and watching the fish kind of gather. And to my human mind, I'm thinking of them resting and sort of getting ready and making attempts at the next little upward sections of natural sections. And sometimes you see them make it, and sometimes they drop back down and try again. So I see how you're creating natural points where they can rest or try again and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And dams are typically built in areas where there's a large natural drop and natural rapids. So if the dam weren't there at all, it would probably be a similar experience to have to cover that height through those rapids and pools.
Interesting. How is it going with, thinking of this going from a USM project to now you're managing volunteers and citizen scientists that are trained to collect data there? How is that process going, and what are some of the benefits and some of the challenges of that?
It's going really well. One of the reasons that a transition to us managing the program made a lot of sense is that we have a large volunteer base of folks who are interested in other more traditional land trust work, especially trail work. And so we've had a lot of folks who've done trail work with us for years, or who are interested in doing it in the future, who are also interested in fish counting. So we had this large base to draw from and advertise to, and we've seen a great response to that. Almost all of the daily counts get filled by volunteers, and then staff fill in the other ones so we don't miss any data.
Oh, cool.
We've also we're always doing trail work in the area, so it's easy to stop by and check in on things, both the equipment and the data and the fish themselves. So it's really folded in seamlessly with a lot of our other active trail work around Mill Brook.
And how are the fish there doing over time? How in that area that you're monitoring, and if you know sort of big picture how they're doing?
Yeah, we see a little bit of variation every year, but there are some trends, even without any sophisticated analysis of the data, that seem evident. We saw when the Sakarapa Dam came out in 2020, I believe. The year before that, I think we were close to 70,000 for the number of fish successfully making it into the lake. And that was at or close to an all-time high. As soon as the dam came out, we saw that number drop to 5,000.
Wow.
Which was much, much lower than the previous years. And since that point, we've seen it climbing each year. And I can't speculate too much on what the effects would be. I know a lot of researchers are looking into that, but from the data, we saw it climbing and generally hanging out in the 50 to 70,000 range. And then since that low point, it's climbed a little bit each year. 5 to 9 to 10 to 12, and last year we had 16, so it was the highest since the dam came out. And this year we're right in the middle of the run, and right now we're looking about 9,000 so far, but we're still seeing a lot in the pools.
Wow.
In the viewing pool where they really collect, where folks go to see them. So that's a good sign that we have many more to come this year. Hopefully we'll see something higher than that 16. We'll see that positive trend continue to increase. And just to speak really quick to where we get that number, we're not actually counting every single fish, but the protocol to come up with a manageable extrapolated number is we have volunteers count in 30-minute slots within a 3-hour time period, 4 times a day. And so we're presuming that the fish are primarily migrating during the 12 lightest hours of the day. And we do 4 30-minute counts spread out within those 12 hours. And then we're able to just extrapolate from that what the daily count would be, and then add them all together to get an estimated total count for the season.
That's really
and we'll start the count a little bit before the run. This year it snuck up on us very early, but the fishway has to manually be opened. So we're confident we didn't miss any fish at the beginning of the season. Normally we'll start it before we know the run has started, and so we'll have some zero counts, and then we'll continue until it's very clear that the run has ended, when we have 4 to 5 days of no fish counted.
It's quite dramatic that it's changed so much due to different factors that people are studying, and it sort of reinforces how important it is to monitor and understand what's happening with them.
Definitely. And again, there could be various factors at play there, and the removal of the dam may just be a coincidence as well.
What about, is there anything I didn't ask you about your work or about this project or Alewives that you wanted to share with the listeners?
For anyone who isn't aware of the opportunity to see the alewives migrating, in our migration in our area, the dam is more just a spot that's accessed by volunteers, unlike places like Damariscotta, where that's the main attraction to see them in the fishways. The main attraction for us is folks actually seeing them in one of what we call the viewing pools. There's a southern and northern viewing pool along the Mill Brook preserved trails, and those are natural rapid spots below which the alewives get stuck in pretty large numbers, which they have to go up by ones and twos, just because the actual flows are that small relative to the size of the pool. So what makes our run and experience really unique is that you can see them migrating in the natural habitat in the secluded forest. So anyone who hasn't checked that out, highly recommend it. Right now we're taping this right smack dab in the middle of the run. I think it'll probably continue till June 1st or so this year based on what we're seeing. But we could also see fish in the pool for a little bit after that, even if they're not fully making it up. Usually we'll see a really large rainstorm wash them out, the individuals who didn't have the energy to make it up, and then some of them will make it all the way back to the ocean and try again next year.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. I definitely will dovetail on that and say it's definitely worth checking out those viewing pools, even if you have a little bit of a trip to the area, because it's quite incredible and it's pretty accessible on foot. I know when my girls were younger and the viewing pools were sort of, I think, being advertised or established, at least the first time I heard of them. It's a very easy trip with younger children, but if you're an adult with friends or on your own, it's really worth it. It's a very, very cool experience.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to have such a cool spot at one of our preserves.
Definitely. Well, Toby, thank you so much. This was fascinating, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of busy alewife season to talk with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
All right. Take care and have a good day.
You too.
In Massachusetts, only 30 minutes from Alewife. I lay in my room, wonder why I've got this life. I met you by surprise, you were hanging out all the time. But you know you saved me from doing something to myself that night.
I'm lying here looking straight down through the grate at the fish ladder, and I'm reflecting a little bit on boredom. It's reminding me of some science projects I did in years past where I was observing things happening over a long time scale, counting the number of seals over time on rock, counting the number of mussel larvae in a sample, but for hours and hours and hours on end under a microscope. And I feel like science can be really exciting and dynamic, and then sometimes at the micro level, there can just be time spent waiting. Oh, there went a fish. I think that's okay. I think in our lives now, we're often really scheduled and rushing and feeling time crunched. There may be a little bit of a cultural thing here. Like I lived in a tiny town in Baja for one summer, and it didn't really feel like that. There was a different relationship culturally with time there, but in the United States where I live, I feel like often things feel overscheduled or very busy. And while I felt busy trying to get out here today for my sort of section of fish observing, now that I'm here, I'm basically just laying here watching for fish, watching the water run through a gate with the breeze. Oh, there's another fish. The breeze sort of in my hair, and I don't know. It's a little bit boring, but also kind of really nice. It's a little cheaper than therapy.
Well, I wish I was a catfish, swimming in the deep blue sea. I'd have all you pretty one fishing after me, fishing after me, yeah, fishing after me.
I'm here at the fish ladder on June 4th, just before 10 a.m. I came this morning to do what's probably my last fish observing or alewife counting today. Ooh, I'm going to pause. I paused there because I wanted to get a picture. There's a big bass hanging around the fish ladder. There's a school of alewifes here, and they just moved to the side because the bass moved under them over the platform next to the fish ladder. So that was interesting. He or she seemed kind of to frighten off the school of alewifes. I've been seeing it, the school move along the shoreline and then return several times to this fish ladder. I'm not sure if they're getting ready to return back downstream. Maybe they wait a while and gather energy before that. They do have some injuries on their backs. I can see some visible scrapes and that sort of thing, presumably from the journey upstream or upriver. So I'll try and look into that and see if I can find out what they do after they spawn. Just a quick note to interject that I did learn later that many people that were volunteering on the fish observing project did see large schools of alewives circling around the grate in the lake near the outlet of the fish ladder, just like I was seeing just now. And Toby said that every year the fisheries observers see the adults who have already spawned and are getting ready to move later that summer or fall back downstream to the ocean. And maybe they're kind of checking out the fish ladder and just getting their bearings, making sure they know what way they're going to be migrating next. So far, nothing is coming up the fish ladder. That's not a huge surprise. I've been hearing through the grapevine that the alewife run upstream is done. But I was surprised to see the school, a large school of alewives hanging out here. So that's kind of fun. And I will post pictures of that on Patreon if you search for Dr. Susan. Pretty cool to see them after they've successfully come upstream and mated or spawned in this lake.
Baby brother about to run me out of my mind. Say, can I go fishing with you? I took him on down to the fishing hole. Now, what do you think that he did do? Pull a great big fish out the bottom of the pond. Now he laughed and jumped cause he was real gone. Many fish bites if you got good bait. I'm a going fishing, yes, I'm going fishing, and my baby going fishing too. Put him in the pot, baby.
In the last episode, when we spoke with the fisheries biologist from the Penobscot Nation in Maine, he talked about how the river or the lake would come alive when the alewives returned, and the water would sort of ripple on the surface. And it really rung true with what I was seeing with the fish that had arrived in Highland Lake, because when the schools would swim along the shore, their fins and bodies would ripple and dip in and out of the air so that it looked like the water was shimmering and rippling wherever they went. It was really interesting to interview Toby Jacobs, and I wish him the best with analyzing the data from this year's sea run. If you'd like to learn more both about the project and about alewives themselves, I'd encourage you to visit the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust website. In the episode notes for this show, I will share a link from the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust Alewife project, which contains not only information about the project itself, but also viewing areas and information about the biology of alewives and their run in Mill Brook, Maine. And as part of this show, a donation was made to the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust with a note thanking them for their participation in this episode. I'd encourage you to visit and support not only the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, but whatever land trust is active in the area where you live, because these grassroots organizations are doing so much for conservation and for wildlife. Next, we're going to look at an interesting scientific study relating to the alewife. The study is called Passage Efficiency of Alewife in a Denial Fishway Using Passive Integrated Transponder Tags by Sullivan, Bailey, and Berlinski, and this was published in the North American Journal of Fisheries Management from 2023. Just a side note that passive integrated transponder tags, or otherwise known as PIT tags, are tiny microchip tags that are used to sort of implant in fish and then track them in studies. And they can be monitored and read with a handheld scanner, but, and this is really cool, they also can be registered and scanned as they pass by automated detection systems. So you could potentially have a detection system in a location that would read as the fish passed by and identify each individual tag. So these, for a fish like the alewife, which has a wide and very complex migration, this is a game changer for understanding their life cycle and where they go. In this study, the authors found a couple really interesting things, and they do point out that along the coastal rivers of the Atlantic coast, these fish have seen a precipitous population decline due to many factors, including dam construction and others. And we've been learning a lot about that, both this episode and the last episode where we talked to representatives of the Penobscot Nation about their perspectives on the alewife restoration, and river restoration. If you haven't listened to that episode, it pairs really nicely with this episode, and I'd encourage you to check it out. For now, for this study, one interesting thing they found was that the longer the fishway or the fish ladder, the more successful the fish were getting through it. I think it's pretty cool that this study showed this with the data. It kind of makes sense because for any given height that the fish have to make it up past a dam, the longer it is, the less steep it is. If you can kind of picture from geometry a triangle with one, the base of it getting longer, then the angle is just going to get less and less steep to make it up the same height. So that's pretty cool, and it makes some sense. It also might mean that that fish ladder could have more little twists and turns and meanderings and little hidey holes where fish could take a break as they make their way upstream. And so the authors talk a bit more about that in the paper. They also found that for both male and female fish, their chance to making it back to the dam at least a year after the original tagging was about 63-64%. And that actually struck me as pretty cool and a sign of how resilient these little fish are, because well over half of them are making it back a year later despite having to swim miles upstream, face all of that predatory pressure from ospreys and bass and all the animals that like to eat them, and also breed when they're up in the lake. So there's a lot of biological pressure on these little fish, and over half of them made it back a year later. So you have to hand it to the alewives and making it through all of those challenges. We're going to end with a poem about alewives. Today's poem is written by Kristen Davis and is called Alewives at Damerscotta. Writhing pulse in the tea-colored river, they swarm toward birthing waters, strange now in the abundance of salt. The shadow of a gull passes over. One by one, they fling their silver bodies against a narrowed rush, whitewater over granite, leap to the next resting pool. 69 stone-lined pools, rungs on a ladder. We come to see them through fields of wild iris, lupins, and buttercups, swerve around the stench of flattened skunk. A pecking crow flap hops away. Some alewives slam into stone, wash back into the pool. Some swim into the metal sluice, slick with the day's harvest, lobster bait. The air heaves with stink. 5 planets and a crescent moon. 5 planets and a crescent moon align overhead, invisible in daylight. A spawning female lays 60,000 eggs, a dozen survive. To descend seaward, tail first, down the ladder. Our origin stories recede, our histories we piece together as we raise our own young. Is there any new life that does not retrace time? Is there any birthing that is not also a homegoing? Only with a concentration can you see a fish dart up against the fall of water, like watching for a shooting star, not sure you really saw, a momentary streak, generations old. Again, that was Alewives at Damerscata by Kristen Davis. If you're interested in checking out the alewives here, I highly encourage it. It does take a little bit of sleuthing to find out when to strike, when the moment is perfect to come see them. If you go on the Land Trust website that I'll link to in the episode notes, they send email updates right around the time to let people know when to go out. It's worth a trip from a couple hours away to see this. It's pretty amazing. This was part 2 of a 2-episode special about the fish, the alewife, a little known but very important fish along the eastern seaboard. In the next episode, we will be learning about monarch butterflies, their conservation, their life cycle. We'll be talking to a scientist and a conservationist, and I hope you'll join us for that episode. In the meantime, please visit my Podbean or Patreon page, which you can find by searching for Dr. Susan on Patreon. I'm going to post some of the photos from when we went and observed and counted the fish at the Mill Brook Dam. So you can see the schools of fish, a video of them moving along, and also some photos of the dam and the fish ladder there. So check that out and let me know what you think. And thank you again for joining us on today's episode. Please like and follow and share the episode and help keep the Biologica podcast rolling. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
And all